Matthew is currently a technical specialist at Oregon Tilth, having been an organic inspector for over 15 years. This experience has brought him to hundreds of farms over 23 states, inspecting every crop type imaginable. He has been a small organic farm manager and operated his own farming enterprises in Northern California for the last 20 years in Oregon. He is thankful to continue to work in agriculture, having received a bachelor's of plant science 25 years ago.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that introduction, Emily, and thank you so much for having me. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today and for our gracious hosts at Oregon State University, the Bee Stewards program. OSU has one of the premier bee labs in the country, and I'm honored to present today among such esteemed company. The work that you are all doing with pollinators, including this series with bee stewards, is very important. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge this collaborative effort, drawing from many different organizations, stakeholders, and perspectives regarding pollinator health and sustainable habitat. And as an additional shout out, my youngest graduates high school in just a few weeks and has been accepted to attend OSU in the fall. So go Beavs. As the title of this presentation notes, we will be discussing topics in organic certification and how that intersects with people, those of us doing the work either physically, through advocacy or otherwise, plants, we all know as the keystones of a functioning habitat, and pollinators, perhaps the most important part of this equation. Thinking beyond the magnificent honeybees seen on this slide, Oregon is home to nearly 600 bee species alone, and our collective efforts to foster their continued success through creating and maintaining habitat is a true calling in life. So thank you for answering that call, showing up today, ready to engage in these topics. So a bit about my J job. Well, at least for the last 15 years or so, headquartered in Corvallis, Oregon, and in business for 50 years, Oregon Tilth is a 501c3 nonprofit and a certification agency with roots going back to 1974. Through our certification work, we certify agricultural products to the federal organic standard. And beyond certification, we support producers through education, resource development, and connecting them with opportunities such as conservation programs and services that help producers build viable, thriving operations. And finally, through our advocacy work, we support policies that strengthen organic agriculture and help farms remain successful for the long term. We also certify to additional third-party standards such as GOTS, the Global Organic Textile Standard, Be Better, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, Salmon Safe, and OPT, which is a grass-fed livestock standard, as well as separate certifications for the European Union and LPO. These are for our Mexico clients that export or sell directly to Mexico. So a whole lot going on to talk about today. Okay, and a bit about me, and I appreciate the introduction. I might repeat a little bit there, as I was an organic inspector in Oregon, Washington, and California. I visited over 600 different organic operations over the years in 23 states, and I've seen nearly every type of cropping and production system you can imagine. I did get my Bachelor of Science from CSU Chico in 2002 and an Associate of Science degree in horticulture from College of the Redwoods in 1999. I've been an organic farm manager growing on 2 to 5 acres of mixed vegetables for farmers markets, for local restaurants. I've taught at the elementary and college level and vegetable gardening practices, as well as landscaping and nursery work in the 1990s. I've essentially been growing plants and working in the ag industry for my entire adult life and career, and I feel totally blessed to continue this work in many different capacities. In this picture here, you'll see Raja, our farm Tibetan Mastiff, guarding the meadow foam and cover crop bed below. And so now I want to talk a little bit about my farm, Wild Everlasting, whom I share with my wife and head pollinator, Matthew Molyneaux, where we've raised our 3 children, all now officially into adulthood. I need to share some of our accolades now, as being recognized for the hard work that goes into planting and maintaining land here in the West. It requires a long-range vision and navigating challenging conditions, often without much thanks or appreciation. So I'll tip my cap again to Flora as her efforts to raise awareness through presentations across the country, in person and virtual, membership in Oregon and Lane County beekeeping clubs, and putting on a one-woman show in her apiary, averaging 40 hives, is a truly remarkable achievement. And I couldn't have advanced this far in my career without her support as well. In 2026, she was interviewed in Bee Culture magazine, as seen here on this slide, where I do get a few mentions as well, discussing our efforts at Wild Everlasting Farm. In 2025, we received NAPPC, the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, Farmer and Rancher Award, and she attended the American Beekeeping Federation Conference in Alabama in January of this year through a grant from that award. We were also part of the Oregon Bee Project, one of their flagship farms in 2021. So we collected pollinators from those bonk traps, which I moved around weekly into different habitats and flowering crops or native vegetation on the farm to survey the types of pollinators that were present. And we did get some very interesting samples, including four, I'm a plant guy, so my Latin is botanical binomials. So bear with me here for the 4 Melisodes, 1 Anthophora, and 2 Xylocopa tabaniformis, which were added to the Oregon Bee Atlas and housed at OSU. These were some of the rarer species not commonly found in Oregon or at all during that collection year. So we received a great mounted collection of these pollinators with the species identification, so we can bring that around and show people when advocating for pollinator diversity on farms in Oregon. So I wanted to share some of those fun things we've been involved in and a little bit more about the site that we chose for farming here, perhaps half foolhardily, with one experience of a June frost and a September frost here in the Cascade foothills. But primarily, this site is so rich in native biodiversity, nearly every plant typical to our bioregion is present on this farm. We have forested areas of several acres that were logged and replanted in 1991. We have a southwest-facing rocky hillside with steep slopes and plants adapted to dry conditions. And then below we have the farmscape with a fine sandy loam soil that had been used primarily for cattle grazing for many years before we took over stewarding. And then the riparian corridor, which has a very diverse mix of flowering trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. As a self-proclaimed plant nerd, or better yet, native plant enthusiast, I cataloged every species I observed over the first 1 to 2 years, hiking every reach of the 30 acres here. Part of that mix, of course, are going to be invasive plants, which we'll touch on a bit later, including wild seedlings from apple and cherry trees on this original homestead here. And those plants and trees have matured on the hillside and do provide additional bloom for pollinators and fruit for wildlife. So where are we now? Rather than planting vegetables for sale any longer, we plant forage crops for bees. I had to ask myself, what do you like growing more? Lettuce, bok choy, and beets, or cover crops, perennial flowers, and herbs? And the answer was clear. We see here on this slide a late sowing of buckwheat, while not a preferred honeybee forage on our farm any longer during honey production season, but it is planted for a late September bloom, where it provides an abundance for many species of pollinators only 30 days after sowing. So keep buckwheat in your back pocket there. Okay, well, here's some pretty nice pictures to look at. Since the next few slides will be very text heavy and I'll be talking a lot. So from the top of that rocky hillside mentioned earlier, you can see plants like manzanita, chinkapin, oak, serviceberry, ceanothus, and even madrone, with huckleberry, rhododendrons, alder, maple, and vine maple at the wooded edge behind me. So we're looking down the farmscape where that 10 acres of bottom land lies along the Row River above Wildwood Falls and Dorena Lake, just to kind of frame the setting for you. And there's also a weedy spring shot from some time ago showing bolting winter veggies and volunteer self-sowing annuals from years past, including some borage in there. And you can just see a couple beehives in the back corner as well. Okay, so here we go on to organic certification stuff. So bear with me if you are an expert already in the field. I apologize, but I did want to give a little background on just what certified organic is because people always have questions. So from the regs, we will learn a little bit more about those specific citations that have to do with biodiversity. But overall, organic is a production system as managed in accordance with the Act, which is OFPA, the Organic Foods Production Act, that preceded the National Organic Program Standard, et cetera, et cetera. Now we'll focus on the definition where it says integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. That is in the federal rule, and just very cool that we're using those words to describe this farm production system. So many of the topics that we'll address today are directly involved in pollinator habitat and maintenance are tied to this definition. So for certified organic, there are various scopes. We're talking about crops, livestock, processing and handling, and wild crop harvesting. So everything from seeds to greenhouse planting stock, row crops, orchards, grains, ruminants, swine, poultry, and crops that are harvested from the wild in uncultivated areas. So every certified operation undergoes an annual inspection and certification process, which reviews all records associated with production. So we can think for crops from a seed to sale audit, all inputs used, fertilizers, pest control products, sanitizers, harvest, post-harvest handling activities, preventing contamination, the biodiversity and resource conservation section, which will be the focus of today's topic, and much more. Livestock keeps similar records, as well as pasture management, manure management, animal welfare, feed, healthcare, etc. There's a lot that goes into organic certification for an operation. I won't touch on the handler-specific stuff here. We'll save that for a different presentation. But we will talk a bit about the Organic System Plan, or the OSP as it will be referred to. It's the production plan created by a certified operation and agreed to by the certifier, which outlines all of the practices noted above. This is the plan that is evaluated annually against site observations during inspection, audit of all records from the producer, and this is squared with the National Organic Program standards to verify compliance. Okay, so now we know a little bit about organic. Let's take a look at the published National Organic Program standards. For a little bit of history, in 2002, the USDA took over and assumed oversight of all certified organic production and labeling in the US. Prior to that, individual certification agencies conducted all of their own oversight and certification to slightly different standards depending on their region and their producers. So a similar structure exists today where the USDA does not do the actual inspection and certification work. It's the accredited agencies such as Oregon Tilth and about 80 others in the US that do the actual field work, file reviews, certification decisions, even adverse action up to revocation, where the USDA NOP handles complaints and appeals. They can issue penalties, they can authorize changes to the rules, undertake advanced investigations and surveillance, and they conduct accreditation audits of all the certification agencies. So they essentially certify the certifiers and handle program oversight. Okay, that was a lot. So we'll pay some attention particularly now to the citations that relate to pollinator habitat and conserving natural resources that support this habitat. So we see in this first section of the federal rule up here that producers must maintain or improve the natural resources of the operation, including soil and water quality. So that's kind of the foundation that we're basing a lot of this on. Next, we see at 205, 206B, outlining some pest control practices, which include development of habitat for natural enemies of pests and using some non-synthetic controls as a primary strategy before relying on using approved pest control inputs or spray applications. So again, right in the federal rule, developing habitat for natural enemies of pests. Think about those little pollinators. Then in 205, we see the requirement for crop rotation, which includes cover crops and catch crops I've highlighted that benefit the overall growing environment. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about what sets organic apart from conventional farming practices as part of the standards we have defined. Now we'll see how those practices are implemented. I will give you a moment to read this slide, but let me just give an overview first, okay? There's a lot of text on this. Again, apologies in advance. The NOP, or National Organic Program, created Handbook Section 5020 that clarifies parts of the standards we just reviewed. It outlines some specific practices for producers to engage in and for certifiers to verify annually when they're on site through the audit of records. There's also some good information in this section on NRCS funding opportunities, CRP lands, and equip grants as they relate to resource conservation activities and improve soil and water conditions, habitat for wildlife and pollinators. So this is just a small excerpt of this 7-page publication I've chosen to highlight a few of the sections of the OSP that require habitat creation and biodiversity conservation. So let me give you a pause. You can read these sections as they were directly pasted from that handbook. So I will note in the second paragraph, it allows for maintaining land outside of the certified area as set aside for natural habitat that may directly benefit the certified crop area. This is where stewarding the natural environment surrounding farmed areas comes into play, providing shelter for pollinators, insects, spiders, and other beneficial organisms and natural predators. So I do have a link to this I can provide with the host after, but again, it's just fascinating to me that our federal government has created a framework and identified these practices and put it into print that support the type of farming system that many of us would like to see in this country. And there it is on the screen in front of you. And we're working towards this on a daily basis, those of us that work in certification and in organic agriculture. Okay, I did say it would be a little text heavy, so bear with me for one more informational but impactful slide. Here is a section of Oregon Tilth's version of the OSP that focuses on natural resources and biodiversity. Remember, the OSP covers everything from maps, field borders, buffers, seeds, fertility, pest control, harvest, equipment use, storage, etc. Let's pay particular attention to question number 4, where the producer will describe how they manage habitat for pollinators, natural predators, and other wildlife. During this presentation, I hope to show some examples of these strategies of creating and maintaining this type of habitat. So we'll discuss a few here that some of you folks may already be implementing. Have you heard of No Mow May? Sounds great, doesn't it? No Mow May. Let's keep all the habitat as intact as possible. Well, if you are in or near the Willamette Valley, you will know that grass just does not stop growing until about June, if we're lucky. And it starts in February. So what about alternate or delayed mowing? Leaving some areas unmowed over a period of time, you will start to observe some changes. In my case, more dandelions over the last 10 years due to exceptional pollination by honeybees and other native pollinators. And on my farm, I'll target shady areas to skip mowing. This is where existing moisture will last a little longer. And over time, I start seeing wild strawberries, vetch, lomatium, camas, and even columbine and tiger lilies start to populate these areas. So looking at question 5 on the slide, it asks, what actions are taken regarding control of invasive species, especially those that threaten natural areas? Okay, so Himalayan blackberry or Scotch broom, anyone? Yes, there will be more on that later, but let's think about nectar flow, nitrogen fixation, and soil cover or habitat protection as positive aspects of these troublesome plants. All the same, organic farmers need to incorporate practices to control invasives and not let Canada thistle, pigweed, or bindweed dominate the farmscape or natural wayside areas. Okay, well, thanks for bearing through all that. Now we'll take a look at some fun stuff. But I do hope you've learned quite a bit about organic certification, the regulations as they apply to pollinators and maintaining habitat, and a producer's responsibility to demonstrate these practices through site inspections, monitoring, and record keeping. So let's take a look at some examples of organic systems where they may meet the mark or where some improvements may be necessary. In this example, some vineyards may be dry farmed, which we primarily see in wine grapes. Now, this clearly conserves water, relying on natural moisture alone. But what about biodiversity? I've seen many dry farmed vineyards or orchards with trellised vines and trees and bare dirt and nothing else. So we've effectively removed competition for moisture, but we've also removed habitat for beneficial macro and microorganisms. Where is the biodiversity? Well, the other example on what's my left here is strip or alternative tillage, or alternate tillage, we'll call it, removing vegetation and competition in every other row, perhaps even for the short term before mowing or further cultivation. Keeping some of this sod intact helps reduce impacts of equipment driving back and forth, spray rigs, hand labor, or mechanical shoot or crop thinning activities. So you can see here two really contrasting systems, both perhaps organic systems. And here's another look at a vineyard at different stages of growth. Does anyone recognize the purple flower in the foreground? Okay, think about it and put your answer in the chat, and we'll see a close-up of that flower on a further slide. It's Phacelia, a pollinator powerhouse. This can be a late spring or early summer bloomer, depending on when it is planted. It tolerates cooler conditions, and I have to say, nearly every species of pollinator in the neighborhood will be visiting your Lacey Phacelia when it's in bloom. This strategy directly provides habitat for pollinators within the cropping system. So looking at the late spring picture above, where we see vines just starting to emerge, we see the ever popular crimson clover. It's grown all over the Willamette Valley as a seed crop. It is growing here as a companion with rose clover. The crimson is a fall-sown annual, while the rose clover is typically a perennial in our climate and may rebloom after a mowing. So the benefits here are nitrogen fixation and an extended bloom time. Okay, hedgerow plantings. So OSU has a great webpage on installing and maintaining hedgerows and their benefits, and a great list of plants too. So I won't reinvent the wheel here and give too detailed of an explanation of installing and maintaining hedgerows or plant selection, but let's do an overview of how hedgerows fit into the landscape in organic or even conventional farming systems. In general, these structures provide numerous benefits as habitat to natural predators and pests. They provide diverse habitat and forage for pollinating insects, think hollow stems and stubble, and leaf litter. They also act as windbreaks, provide soil and water conservation by limiting erosion potential, to name a few of the additional benefits. So if you were planning to site some honeybee hives or mason bee houses, you would likely select an area within or adjacent to this hedgerow to capitalize on these benefits and shade rather than in the center of the field. So another function of habitat that we can use to add pollinators into the mix. Okay, let's talk about buffer zones, which are not just specific to organic farms. And there's also a lot of information out there on buffer zones for you to research on your own. They can be used to prevent livestock from accessing waterways. They can act as a catch crop for pests or mitigate spray drift from neighboring farms or land use activities. Think buffers against roadside spraying. They can also provide seasonal or temporary habitat for beneficials and pollinators. These buffer zones may be planted or managed annually or be permanent habitat, depending on the production system, land type, and objectives of the landowner. I have seen very functional buffer zones and also ineffective buffer zones. In organic systems, crops may be grown in buffer zones that are either intended not to be harvested, but rather plowed down, or harvested as conventional retaining the integrity of the organic status for the rest of the field. Now, this is generally done when there's conventional farm neighbors in close proximity. So here on the right, we see one type of buffer zone between grain fields with the goal of reducing runoff and protecting soil and water quality. The other photo is showing an intentional planting of annual blooming species at the edge of a crop field, providing multiple purposes of buffering along a canal, perhaps smothering weeds at the field edge, and providing that biodiversity component where you may have a few hundred acres of a monocrop, like corn or soybeans being grown beyond. So organic crops can be produced as a monocrop, right? Some producers do grow hundreds of acres of just one thing, but they must also demonstrate some component of biological diversity within or adjacent to cropped areas. Okay, so I did promise some plant pics, so here we go. We're going to see some flowers. We're seeing fennel here that not only provides perennial nectar and pollen. If left standing over the winter or chopped and dropped right in place, you got to chop it kind of high. Those hollow stems provide habitat for many types of pollinators. And the famous Phacelia. With a new flower opening every day, it provides abundant nectar for many different species of pollinators. Today, I'm actually watering my plot of Phacelia that I planted in mid-March, as we just haven't had the rain this year to support it. It is normally a dry farmed crop for me. I just do some cultivation, plant, and let the rain take care of it. And this year it would be very stunted. It would still bloom, but the length and volume of the blooms and nectar would not meet my objectives. So I'm taking advantage of this upcoming cooler weather and sprinkling my plot that's 75 feet by 150 feet to really help that Phacelia along with a promise of blooms in June and nectar for our bees. Okay, so creating habitat. So maybe, like me, you have weed problems. And also, like me, you don't have the time to weed. So consider use of woven weed fabric. This is a synthetic mulch that acts to conserve moisture and suppress weeds while allowing water and air exchange in the soil. Crops can get an earlier start as well, making weed control in adjacent areas more manageable. So here are some flower rows in various states on my farm from several years ago. Now I've grouped some flower types together because, drum roll please, floral fidelity. Many bee species, and honeybees in particular, only visit one type of flower at a time, and they generally don't visit plum blossoms in the morning, mustard for lunch, and maple blooms that evening. Once they find a flower they like, they are full on, all about that pollen flow until it starts to wane, and then they'll move on to another flower type. So here we see some zinnias, snapdragons, tithonia or Mexican sunflower, asters, and other mixed species. Now the blue flower bed was specifically planned for August and September blooming only. This is the peak of the dearth, a time when very little flowers are blooming or any pollen is flowing. You can see how dry everything is in the surrounding areas. So here we see Caryopteris or bluebeard, Russian sage, and New England asters or Michaelmas daisy. You may also be asking, boy, buying hundreds of plants is expensive. How can I do this? I will say everything you see in these photos was started by me through seeds, cuttings, or divisions. So I specifically propagate many perennial plants and step them up in pots in a small greenhouse nursery for planting in the fall or even planting the following year for blooms in subsequent years. So the hummingbird moth. This is one of my favorite all-time pollinators. I don't have a video to share, but I have a quick story. Right in this Caryopteris bed, one late August evening, they only come out in the evening, I had an interaction with 4 or 5 hummingbird moths, which, mind you, are almost the size of the palm of your hand and flutter just like a hummingbird. They were going nuts on this Caryopteris. And as I got in with my phone, of course, to take pictures, they all scattered. And as I backed off, they came to check me out, and they hovered just inches from my face as I was frozen, back down to the plants, back up to me, back down to the plant. So here they are assessing the risk of having this predator in their scene, but they just could not resist getting in there and pollinating these flowers. And so this dance continued for several minutes where they would scatter, come check me out, check out the plants as I was checking them out. And it's this connection and these moments in nature, these unexpected moments where we're observing insects and they're observing us. And again, I had started these plants from cuttings 2 years prior, really just for this moment, this late August night, for these hummingbird moths that were only interested in this one plant at this one time of day. So a pretty fascinating experience I wanted to share, and sort of the why behind why we're doing this. Okay, so here's some shots of some cover crops. We have crimson clover and meadow foam. So I plant this forage for honeybees in rotation at my farm and try to stagger bloom times when possible, as we do not bring our hives anywhere else for pollination, so we have to provide enough forage for them here through cultivated crops and stewarding the native vegetation that surrounds the property. I do rototill some ground, and I try to let it rest for 1 to 2 years in between. So this seed was planted with a handheld broadcast spreader and raked in by hand. You don't need fancy equipment, a no-till drill, or some expensive tractor implement. A lot of this can be done by hand. I do mow, and I weed eat blackberries for too many hours per year to count. I've used goats for grazing in hard to access areas, being strategic with their foraging based on the season. So let's see if we can play this video here and take a listen to the buzzing honeybees. You can hear not just the honeybees, but a plethora of other species, including a butterfly. The river is also buzzing in the background, so bear with me here. Well, maybe not quite the audio buzz I was hoping for, but you kind of get the picture. This is my young orchard and weed whacking the grass and interspersing a really high potent nectar flow companion crop of meadow foam and crimson clover, two of my favorites. And I wanted to play the video again. Okay, let's take a look at a few more here. Some other pollinator powerhouse flowers. These dense plantings, as seen here in the bee balm patch, which was started from seed, help keep weed competition down. Keeping blackberries and grass in check allows this Oregon grape, which is our state flower here, to compete. So we have both species. There's a tall, and then there's the repens, which is a low grower you'll find in the forest. And there's even some hybrids in between. And if you'll notice that science has just updated the genus name to Berberis from Mahonia, and I am slow to adopt this change. So I don't know, I may forever refer to it as Mahonia. There's also ornamental varieties. I actually got one at a nursery in Corvallis there that blooms in January. So thinking about plants that bloom in January, February, we do get 55-degree days, 60-degree days. You will notice not just honeybees, but some other pollinators out on these warm winter days. So what can we do to help provide some forage if they happen to be out and about during these winter months? The other plant I'll give a nod to here is sweetbox or sarcococa. It's a great winter pollinator forage plant. Second quick story, I do have some time. We're getting towards the end of it here. In this exact Oregon grape plant that you'll see, bumblebees have nested either in the base or down underground, because every time I come rumbling by in my riding lawnmower, vibrating the ground, they come out not in attack mode, but in distress mode of trying to deter me from coming by their patch, whether it's in bloom or not. And so I have to kind of speed up, quickly mow by this, and then slow down as I proceed past. And it never fails. Year after year, the same plant, multiple generations of bumblebees have nested in it. And again, one of those observations that you make as you slow down and pay attention to your activities in and around these plants and this habitat, and just who is taking up residence and who is pollinating. These plants in bloom, the Oregon grape, you'll see everyone just going crazy for this. And it's a fairly short window. So one of my favorite plants to talk about when we're talking pollinator habitat and a powerhouse of a native. Okay, so what can you do? Let's bring this back around to the people. We've talked about plants and pollinators aplenty. So I will say that you are already doing it, right? Showing up here today is a clear sign that protecting pollinator habitat is important to you. Learn everything you can. As I said at the outset, we are so fortunate to have the resources that OSU provides through research and outreach and project development, along with some internationally recognized experts in the field of honeybees and native bees. Now, the pros and cons of habitat for either or, I will leave that hot debate to the PhDs to sort it out. I will give you my personal take, though, which is there is room for everyone. By engaging in some of these practices I've outlined in this presentation, planting blooming cover crops, maintaining or creating habitat and buffer zones, stewarding native vegetation as best we can, it all helps. These activities provide more nectar for honeybees than would naturally exist and lessen the burden on native plant populations that are specialized to forage only with certain species of pollinators. Planting backyard gardens, letting your veggies go to flower and seed, even planter boxes or container gardens, ideally organically grown transplants, planting some kind of flowers that bloom in summer into fall are all an excellent place to start. So if you have the ability to create and maintain hedgerows, well, then do that. Seek grant funding and participation from federal programs that can help with the cost of plants and establishment. Then the stewarding is up to you in the future. Can we save the bees or pollinators? Maybe they don't need saving. Maybe we need the help in preserving what they have already given us. For remember, our agricultural practices have evolved right alongside the bees and the pollinators. They have selected the plants that serve them, just as we have selected the plants that serve our purposes. And lastly, keep having these conversations. The more we talk about people, plants, and pollinators and how they intersect, the more we share our personal experiences and interactions with these natural systems, the more we advance these causes. So I did note one other program at the beginning of the presentation called Be Better Certified. So I will give a quick shout out here. If you're not ready to be certified organic, like I get it, you may have heard of this certification, and Oregon Tilth is one of the agencies that carries out this certification work. It was started by a collaboration between Oregon Tilth and the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation based in Portland, Oregon, and is now a nationwide program creating a framework for farming that keeps protecting pollinators at the forefront. It does not require organic certification to apply. It has a list of approved pesticides and some parameters on their use. But from these standards, we can garner some best practices on when to apply fungicides and insecticides. Hint, it's not at bloom time, or there's a required mowing of blooming cover or crops prior to application, and particular buffer distances to be adhered to when making those applications. Habitat creation is another required part of this standard, as well as buffer zones between cropping and natural areas or intentionally planted permanent habitat. So these habitat areas must be a minimum of 5% of the total farm area. So these images are directly from their website, and I will refer you there for more details at bebettercertified.org. So again, just a shout out to some other programs that are doing the same kind of work that we're hoping to accomplish through some of these other programs we're involved in. So in closing, I'll thank you again for participating today and for our hosts for putting this series on. I hope you've come away as inspired as I am to plant some flowers now for blooms this summer. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have or keep this discussion going as time will allow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew. What an amazing presentation. And we do have some questions in the chat. Um, I am happy to just kind of read them out in the order that they were received. And then I also have a couple questions if we
Perfect.
have time. So um, the first question we got is, what made you want to invest so much in your property for native pollinators? So maybe what was that spark for
Yeah.
you?
That's a great question. And I had planned to start kind of more of a commercial scale orchard, and I was working towards that goal and ran numbers and analytics, but I always wanted this place to kind of be a place for people as well. And there was so much kind of precious native habitat that I didn't want to disturb with agricultural activities. And so that was kind of a goal going into it. And, as things in life shift, I have this 40-hour-a-week job. I have other off-farm pursuits as well. Um, there just wasn't the time to put in. I did a lot of, as I said, veg farming in my 20s and my 30s. In my 40s, I'm taking a shift and seeing as my wife's efforts with her honeybees really starting to take off and seeing that as a viable option for income. And again, for a lot of commercial honeybee operations, they have to follow the nectar. They're taking their hives to
Mm.
pollinate commercially. How can we do that on one site and impart truly like a taste of place where these bees have access to native forage and what we plant for them? And that's it. We're right at the edge of the wilds, 2 miles from the national forest. So no commercial agriculture up here. And that was another part of the catalyst for a shift to how can I continue to farm and have that crop be honey and be habitat for pollinators rather than, again, bringing a head of lettuce to the market every week that's perishable that I got to sell for a couple bucks. And so, uh, definitely fortunate to have that privilege to be able to do that and work in agriculture for my desk job that supports my ability to do that. But it was kind of a natural shift away from commercializing crops and trending towards growing pollinator habitat.
Awesome. Oh, and I love what you said at the end of your presentation. There's room for everyone. And I think that that like really is just such a wonderful philosophy for habitat to bring forward. I really value that. Um, the next question we have in the chat is, would pesticides in the water be a problem for flowers growing by a stream that bees visit?
That is a great question. And I'll tell you what I know about it and kind of what I don't know. There are certain types of pesticides and even fungicides that are applied in water, say irrigation canals. There are like copper products that might even be registered for use for organic. Um, they could still be problematic to other pollinators. There's things like BT that may also be an organically approved pesticide type that could be used to control mosquito larvae, say, for example, in water. Um, I don't claim to have all the research at the ready for quantified impacts on pollinators. I would just say in any of those types of applications, you'll want to monitor. You'll want to pay attention to what's blooming when along a stream side or the pond edge, for example, and when you might make those applications to achieve the desired outcome, control of aquatic weed species or algae or mosquito insect larva species stage versus the impact that it may have on other users of that same space, other types of pollinators. So there are definitely organic type controls. There are conventional type controls that are also allowed in waterways that might even be used as part of stream habitat restoration activities to kill weed species. Um, and what those, again, weighing those benefits and risks. What are the benefits of doing this stream restoration activities, allowing native plants to establish and take hold for long-term benefit while killing some of these invasive plant species and perhaps doing harm to pollinators during that application event, whereas the long-term benefit of future habitat for pollinators may outweigh that application risk. So that's kind of my spiel on that. Great
Yeah.
question, though.
No, that's a great answer. And I also just want to highlight one more time, the label is the law, so always follow the label instructions. And that's also super important to remember with pesticides. Um, the next question we have in the chat is, can honey be organic?
So another great question, and I was going to queue up a slide on that, but it was a little bit off topic. But I do have a little bit of information in my back pocket here. So honey can be organic. For USDA certified currently in the lower 48 states of the United States, there really is not a certified producer. So there's a bit of nuance to the interpretation of this. The National Organic Standards Board, which just happens to be meeting this week, I was attending virtually part of that conference today, in fact. They
Fun.
made a recommendation in 2010 for an apiculture standard. However, as the pace of government works and business catches up, that standard has not necessarily been published or incorporated as part of the rule. And so it's a kind of a nebulous space, which sounds kind of weird because we don't really want that to happen. But in that recommendation, they've identified a pollinator forage zone, and they've identified the next zone. Let me get my little cheat sheet here. Oops. Oh gosh. The forage zone and the surveillance zone. You add those two
Mm,
zones together, you come up with a 4-mile radius. Now that's your
wow.
radius. So you're looking at a radius on both sides of 4 miles. So if you can cite hives with an 8-mile circle drawn around you, that does not have any of these prohibited materials applied, you can have honey. You can have certified organic honey. And so what we do find is in areas like the rainforest in Brazil or the Yucatan, I believe there's some places in Hawaii, in like far eastern Russia, where we have wildland where for literally tens and tens of thousands of acres, there are no chemicals applied. We can cite hives that can have certified organic honey harvested from these wild crop type locations. And so that's kind of the parameters on that. This NOSB recommendation, if you search it up, you'll find all kinds of information on the internet, but go to the source, go to the federal publication that's listed there. And it's really fascinating if you're a beekeeper because it talks about your woodenware, your hiveware, plastic frames would have to be dipped in organic wax, and all the specifications that go with creating that hive, the treatments for varroa mites. Fortunately, the most effective treatments that we currently have, oxalic acid and oh gosh, and formic acid, are both, for the most part, I'll just say, depending on the product that you have, but those two raw ingredients are approved for organic use in treating honeybees for varroa mites. So that is something that has just been clarified, I think, 2019. And so there are effective tools with organic management, and I do see this as something that happens in the future. But again, having that zone of influence where you can guarantee your honeybees are only foraging on certified organic crops or on certified wild crops is really challenging to meet. I can see it happening, somewhere in the future, but right now in the lower 48, we don't have a lot of certified organic honey. It's all going to be imported from overseas. And here in the US, then we regulate the oversight of the handling, the post-harvest handling, and the origin back to the last certified source that honeybee came from. And we rely on our international partners that do this organic certification work as well on their oversight of observations of those producers and those fields. So yes, they do go out to those hives in these remote locations for wild crop honey. I know inspectors that have gone on boats out in the ocean, taken helicopters and been dropped into these remote locations that can't be accessed by road to observe wild crops and some of these bees.
Wow, awesome. That is so fascinating. I had no idea that so much went into creating organic honey, from what the bees are foraging on all the way to what kind of environment the bees are allowed to be raised in, all the way to what kind of treatments you can do. Um, that is absolutely fascinating. Um, and then we are almost at time, so we might not even need any of the questions I have, but does the next question we have is, does all of the habitat need to be together in one area? So presumably this is, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but presumably this is like on farm habitat. Would you need to put it all in one place?
Yeah, not necessarily. So, for certified organic, there's a lot of interpretation into those practices for resource conservation and habitat creation and management. For that Be Better standard that I mentioned, and I'm not an expert on that topic specifically, with that 5%, it can be broken out. So it doesn't have to all be in one, contiguous chunk. And the same would be true for certified organic, right? There's a number of practices you can undertake, and having one buffer zone, having a strip crop in one particular area. Um, we look at the whole system approach to um, this habitat that you're creating, and the assessment that's done as to whether you're meeting that. If you're really making a good attempt, um, that's great. As far as overall benefit, like to pollinators and having habitat in different areas, I would say yes, for sure. Like a rotting wood pile that's left alone and not mowed, directly around, that can be habitat, right? And that can be just one small area that's left undisturbed by man, and you're going to see all kinds of different organisms take that up. It doesn't have to be a beautiful blooming, hedgerow.
Awesome. And then our last question is, where can we purchase wild everlasting farm honey if people are interested in tasting some of the honey that comes off of your farm? Where can we find it?
Oh my goodness. Well, we do have a website, and it does have a shop in it. We had a wonderful website some years ago, and we had to shift hosts, and so it's not quite as polished as it once was, but it still functions well. You can get a little bit more information on the farm and some of the services that we offer. And yeah, wildeverlasting.com would be the
Awesome.
plug there.
And it looks like we've got a link in the chat for that as well.
Oh, sweet.
Um, so awesome. And then the one of the questions I had, just out of my own curiosity, is, what is, like, when you are certifying your farm, like, what is the benefit of getting multiple certifications? Like, how would you weigh? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's so interesting to think about getting organic versus like salmon safe versus going after both of them. Is that feasible to do at the same time? Does that make
Yes,
sense?
yeah, it does, absolutely. And so, you might have multiple agencies that handle some of those certifications. So do your research on the costs and who can provide those. Oregon Tilth, we do the examples you've given, organic and salmon safe, or organic and Be Better, at the same time. So we will save costs, because having an inspector travel out there can be expensive. They'll have to stay overnight, often at a hotel, and conduct that assessment. You're paying for their time, and in the report writing, which is now extended for some of these add-on certifications. So we can do them both. As far as the benefits, it's that label claim, right? Is part of it. And so if whoever you may be direct marketing, you may be selling through a wholesaler, and they want that additional label claim. Um, if you're marketing wine grapes, they might want that salmon safe designation on there, as well as certified organic, to show that you are aware and mitigating erosion effects, and not using pesticides right up to the water's edge, or having other type of impacts on groundwater even. So the salmon safe, for example, doesn't have to be right next to a stream bearing or salmon bearing stream to qualify. And so there are other practices that we'll look to assess to meet those standards. And so, yeah, it's really in it's kind of in marketing and some of those logos, but you can advertise your farm as doing some of these additional practices that goes beyond just a certified organic USDA logo to let your consumers know that you're all in on some of these conservation efforts and doing everything you can to steward your farm and be aware of its impacts on the natural environment, pollinators, fish, and all those types of things.
That's awesome. Well, we are right on time. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And um, we will be reaching out to the bee stewards about next month and checking in with you on what is to come next. But we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Sounds great. This was fun.
Thank you so much.